cara pembuatan series lebih dalam sih.
Di Indonesia ini masih jarang banget kegiatan workshop yang emang fokusnya di series gitu.
Pengen ngulik banget gitu gimana sih cara pembuatan film dan sinetron itu di platform-platform seperti ini.
Jadi kebayang banget gimana proses produksi untuk menyiapkan materi-materi yang akan dikirimkan atau dipublikasikan di OTT. Terus juga bukan cuma teknisnya aja, tapi juga kita dikasih tahu gambaran di dunia nyatanya seperti apa.
Akhirnya di sini bisa tahu lebih jauh tentang gimana sih bikin series itu yang bener, peraturannya harusnya seberapa lama di plotnya dibikin.
Terima kasih sudah hadir di Cerita-Cerita Volume 4.
Sampai jumpa lagi di Cerita-Cerita Volume berikutnya.
Go.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat datang kembali lagi dalam diskusi online Cerita-Cerita Volume 6, sebuah event rutin yang diselenggarakan Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan Republik Indonesia. Nah, yang terhormat nih saya ingin menyapa Bapak Ahmad Mahendra, Direktur Perfilman, Musik dan Media Baru Kementrian Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan Republik Indonesia, teman-teman setia dari Cerita-Cerita dan juga rekan-rekan media. Saya Rahma Alia, sekali lagi ya saya mau menyapa supaya semangat nih semuanya. Good Saturday morning fellows. Thank you all for joining us now. I hope you're all healthy and well. Don't let this pandemic takes over you. Jadi tetap waspada protokol kesehatan ya. Nah, meski pandemi, cerita-cerita juga tidak berhenti loh diselenggarakan. Ini merupakan kedua kalinya gelaran acara wahana edukasi diadakan secara daring atau online. Dan tentunya spesial karena kita kedatangan tamu dari Hollywood. Wow. So, I'm sure all of you are looking forward for this session to happen. And this is it. We're going to learn and discuss some vital knowledge as well as tips about the role of creator and how writer's room works. Nah, mungkin di antara teman-teman ada yang berprofesi sebagai writer, filmmaker, atau kreatif lainnya. Sesi ini bisa menjadi panduan standar dalam membuat konten untuk serial, film, atau konten lainnya, terutama untuk ditayangkan di platform yang belakangan ini menjadi highlight di Indonesia dan juga negara lain. The top. Dengan tren ini tentu menjadi kesempatan nih bagi kreator Indonesia untuk menghasilkan konten berstandar mumpuni. And who knows, maybe your work one day be viewed internationally. Now, talking about the guest, yes, we do have a very, very special guest joining us live from the United States of America, Mr. Aaron Rassen Thomas. Where I recall some of his wonderful, wonderful works, series like SWAT or SWAT, CSI New York, The Get Down, Southland, Friday Night Lights, and many more. And of course, later also we'll be joining on the discussion one of the most talented and creative ladies in town, Mbak Gina S. Nur. And to conduct the discussion, Wahana Kreator. Oke, sebelum kita mulai, saya mau ingatkan teman-teman semua di sini untuk ikutan call to action quiz. Caranya sangat gampang. Post story momen kalian selama mengikuti acara cerita-cerita dan tag @wahana.edukasi, @wahana.kreator, @pusbangfilm, serta masukkan hashtag cerita-cerita. Menangkan 10 hadiah menarik berupa goodie bag untuk 10 peserta pemenang yang beruntung ya. Nah, pengumumannya akan diumumkan besok di akhir sesi ketiga, Minggu 6 Desember 2020 pukul 17. Okay, now without further ado, to start off, mari kita dengarkan sambutan dari Pak Ahmad Mahendra, Direktur Film Media Baru Kementerian Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan Republik Indonesia. Kami persilakan Pak Ahmad Mahendra.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, Rahayu. Yang kami hormati Mas Salman Aristo dan Mbak Gina S. Nur selaku penyelenggara dan pemilik wahana edukasi. yang kami hormati para narasumber dan para hadirin sekalian. Pertama-tama, marilah kita panjatkan puji syukur kita kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, sehingga dalam kesempatan ini kita dipertemukan dalam acara Cerita-cerita volume 6. Kementrian Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan melalui Direktorat Perfilman Musik dan Media Baru menyambut baik dan mendukung penuh kegiatan ini, karena hal ini sejalan dengan apa yang sudah disampaikan oleh Bapak Presiden kita, Bapak Jokowi, yaitu tentang storynomic, yaitu bagaimana penguatan untuk menarasikan tentang Indonesia. Nah, kegiatan ini sangat sejalan untuk hal ini. Kegiatan ini pula memberikan pemahaman ataupun pengetahuan bagaimana cara pengembangan cerita, terutama konten-konten lokal yang sangat diperlukan bagi para penulis untuk mengembangkan ide. Harapan kami ke depan kegiatan ini bisa terus diadakan karena bisa memberikan kontribusi untuk membantu percepatan industri kreatif di Indonesia sekaligus untuk upaya pemajuan kebudayaan Indonesia. Terima kasih kepada semua pihak yang telah membantu terselenggara kegiatan ini dan kepada semua hadirin selamat mengikuti kegiatan ini. Demikian, akhirul kalam. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Pak Ahmad Mahendra untuk sambutannya. Cerita-cerita adalah acara 3 bulanan yang diinisiasi Wahana Edukasi, bagian dari Wahana Kreator sebagai bentuk kepedulian dan harapan untuk membantu percepatan perkembangan industri kreatif Indonesia. Nah, selalu konsisten, selalu berbagi update informasi dan ilmu terbaru seputar dunia konten dan kreatif untuk teman-teman industri. Jadi kurang afdol nih kalau kita belum dengar dari tuan rumah, maka dari itu please join me to welcome co-founder and CEO Wahana Kreator, Mas Salman Aristo. Silakan Mas Salman Aristo.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi semua teman-teman. Terima kasih untuk semua mau bergabung di hari yang saya harap ini bisa menjadi sesuatu titik yang bisa signifikan di industri kreatif Indonesia, terutama di industri pembuatan serial di Indonesia. Saya sangat berterima kasih sekali dengan Aaron Thomas. Thank you, Aaron, for willing to share your a very important experience and knowledge with us again. Seperti yang tadi dikatakan oleh Mbak Ali Rahma, cerita-cerita ini adalah bentuk dari kepedulian dan harapan Wahana Edukasi, merupakan bagian dari Wahana Kreator untuk membantu mendorong percepatan dari perkembangan industri kreatif di Indonesia. Karena kami tahu persis bahwa kalau bicara soal bakat, rasanya Indonesia tidak akan pernah kekurangan. Dan kami mau membantu percepatan soal bagaimana bakat-bakat itu bisa lebih cepat tumbuh dan mendapatkan kesempatan yang lebih lebar lagi. Nah, di cerita-cerita volume ke-6 ini memang sangat spesial sekali karena kita akan melakukan sesuatu yang baru gitu ya dibandingkan dengan 5 episode sebelumnya, 5 volume sebelumnya gitu. Di sini kami berkolaborasi dengan Kementrian Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan Republik Indonesia lewat Departemen Perfilman, Musik dan Media Baru. Terima kasih Pak Ahmad Mahendra untuk kesempatan dan kerjasama ini. Saya berharap ini menjadi yang pertama untuk kerjasama berikut-berikutnya lagi nanti. Nah, kerjasama kali ini juga menjadi spesial, cerita-cerita volume 6 ini menjadi spesial karena kita akan membahas secara spesifik konten kreatif dalam medium yang bernama serial. Dan ini menjadi titik sorot wahana kreator dan wahana edukasi karena perkembangan yang kita tahu ya platform over the top atau kita mengenalnya dengan platform OTT gitu yang sudah begitu menyebar dan di tengah-tengah situasi pandemi ini meningkat kebutuhannya gitu, meningkat tuntutannya dari publik untuk bisa punya serial-serial yang mereka bisa jadikan teman, mereka bisa menjadikan sahabat di tengah situasi yang seperti ini. Dan kami melihat bahwa untuk bisa menjadi sahabat yang baik, teman yang baik, maka teman-teman calon kreator, teman-teman yang ada di industri kreatif perlu modal gitu, perlu bahan untuk diolah dan kami mencoba memberikan itu lewat workshop cerita-cerita volume ke-6 ini. Dengan salah satunya nanti Aran akan memperkenalkan, akan membagi salah satu titik penting bagaimana dalam serial dia dikembangkan, yaitu adalah penggunaan writers room, ya, ruang penulis, ruang development, ruang pengembangan cerita untuk menghasilkan konten yang solid. Karena memang posisi pembuatan serial ini adalah sesuatu yang berbeda lagi dengan pembuatan layar lebar yang mungkin kita tahu selama ini. Itu ada posisi yang bernama kreator di situ yang posisinya unik sekali dan itu akan menumbuhkan kesempatan-kesempatan mempertemukan kita industri kreatif Indonesia dengan kesempatan-kesempatan baru gitu untuk bisa mendapatkan bentuk-bentuk kreatif baru lagi dengan sama-sama menumbuhkan posisi kreator dan writers room ini di Indonesia. Dan saya berharap setelah acara ini tentu saja pertama harapan saya adalah ini bisa dinikmati dan bisa diserap ilmunya sebanyak mungkin. Teman-teman bisa memerahnya dengan sangat efektif dan penuh guna nantinya. Dan yang jelas sekali saya berharap ini bisa menjadi inspirasi buat teman-teman peserta nanti mengembangkan writers room-nya sendiri-sendiri. Sehingga kita punya banyak kreator, kita punya banyak writers room yang artinya nanti kita punya banyak daya dorong gitu ya untuk makin mempercepat lagi, menumbuhkan lagi industri kreatif Indonesia menjadi lebih baik. Saya rasa itu saja karena saya juga udah nggak sabar pengen mendengarkan apa yang akan Aaron share gitu karena buat saya ini rasanya akan jadi sangat penting sekali buat kita. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah, Mas Aris. Now, this is what we've been waiting for. We are entering our core program today, the discussion session with Mr. Aaron Thomas, who is with us live from Los Angeles. Good evening to you, Mr. Aaron Thomas. And we're going to talk about the processes, challenges, and dramas behind story making in the writer's room. And it is going to be dig deeply in the session. This discussion is going to be led by Mas Arif Asidik, who is Head of IP Development Wahana Kreator. Mas Arif is also a story developer, a story editor in some films such as Dua Garis Biru, Posesif, Suatu Hari Nanti, Keluarga Cemara, Bumi Manusia, dan Rudy Habibi. Okay, Mas Arif. How are you, Mas Arif? Don't forget to unmute your mic, Mas Arif.
Halo Mbak, selamat pagi. Terima kasih, saya baik-baik saja.
Alhamdulillah, selamat pagi Mas. So, kita sudah siap nih ya untuk ngobrol-ngobrol sama Aaron Thomas?
Siap.
Alright, now Good. So I'm handing over the floor to you, Mas.
Oke. Terima kasih Mbak Alia Rahma. Oke. Selamat pagi teman-teman semua. Selamat datang di Cerita-Cerita, sebuah platform sharing ilmu, diskusi mengenai perkembangan konten kreatif di Indonesia, dipersembahkan oleh Wahana Kreator Nusantara. Kita sudah sampai ke penghujung 2020, ini udah bulan Desember, sebuah tahun yang cukup berat, banyak sekali tantangannya, dan salah satu yang menarik adalah bahwa kita sudah sampai ke akhir tahun juga, yang sebetulnya adalah masa yang menarik untuk membuat persiapan apa yang kita bisa lakukan di tahun 2021. Di dunia kreatif, persiapan tersebut biasanya dimulai dari titik penulisan naskah. Nah, ada salah satu perkembangan yang menarik di tahun 2019, mungkin dari tahun 2018 bahkan sampai sekarang di Indonesia adalah munculnya streaming platform yang beragam di Indonesia. Yang dengan kemunculan mereka, muncul pula kesempatan untuk membuat konten serial yang pada naturnya punya cerita yang lebih rumit dan lebih panjang. Menariknya adalah bahwa kemunculan kesempatan tersebut tentu saja juga memunculkan tantangan tertentu. Dengan konten serial ini, dengan ceritanya yang lebih rumit dan lebih panjang, penulis tidak lagi cukup bekerja sendiri. Dan di titik itulah sebetulnya kebutuhan untuk writer's room itu hadir. Penulis-penulis yang selama ini kita beranggapannya adalah orang-orang yang bekerja sendirian, kemudian menyendiri, bayangannya adalah orang yang kemudian soliter banget gitu hidupnya. Sekarang harus bertemu dengan orang lain, harus melakukan kolaborasi dengan orang lain karena materi yang dia kerjakan tidak cukup di-handle dia sendiri, tapi harus dilakukan bersama banyak orang. Nah, inilah inilah awal dari kemunculan writer's room dan kenapa writer's room muncul. Untuk membicarakan hal ini, kita mengundang Aaron Thomas, seorang profesional penulis skenario profesional dan juga orang yang sudah punya pengalaman panjang di writer's room. Aaron sudah masuk ke industri ini di tahun 2000, so it's like 20 years ago, udah 20 tahun yang lalu, dan masuk di serial pertama yang kemudian dia handle adalah Soul Food. Aku rasa langsung saja, jadi sebetulnya kita bisa langsung saja ke Aaron. Halo, Aaron.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to Cerita-Cerita.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a bit about what you are doing right now? What project are you doing right now?
Yes, I am currently writing and producing a television show that I co-created. It's a show about police called SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. And the show currently airs on CBS in the United States on Wednesday nights. And we're in the middle of shooting season 4 of SWAT. And so even in fact today, I've been giving notes on a script that we are currently writing and also an episode that we're currently editing and then giving advice to one of our directors who starts to shoot a different episode starting tomorrow. So
the project is still going on even in the times of pandemic?
Yes, incredibly so. It requires a lot of planning and being very, very careful. But we are one of the few shows who have been able to find a system that works where we're able to do it safely and to keep people responsibly spaced so that we can continue to shoot.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, we are inviting you today to talk about your experience, to share about your experience in writing content, in writing serials in writer's room, which is actually not a familiar thing in Indonesia. We are still seeing writers as people who work by themselves, individual workers, and not someone who works collaboratively. So enlighten us.
Well, I can offer only my opinion, and certainly everyone will have different opinions on what they like. But what I have found is with a writer's room, which is when multiple writers gather, whether it's online, in Zoom, or in person, to be able to brainstorm different ideas, to discuss different ideas, to collaborate. Where it is helpful is when you have many stories to tell, many episodes to make. If you only have one movie or, one or two episodes, you may not need a writer's room. One writer can do that. But if you have many stories to tell, in the case of the show that I work on now, SWAT, we make anywhere from 18 to 22 episodes every year. And so it is helpful a lot of times to have more than one writer, to have many writers, so that you can continue to keep the schedule and to make your deadlines. The writer's room for us is typically every day, every weekday. We have a team of 12 writers, and the 12 writers gather starting at 10 o'clock a.m. Through the day. We will discuss ideas that we like, ideas that we don't. Sometimes we will debate, and we'll come up with what we think are the best ideas for stories. We'll have breaks here or there. We'll have a lunch break in the middle of the day, and then we'll finish the day. It starts at 10 o'clock and finishes at 6 o'clock p.m. And every day we have a goal as to what we want to accomplish. So we may want to create, for instance, for one episode, it's a police show, so we tell crime stories. We may decide that we want to make sure that we come up with the idea for our crime story for an episode on that day, and we'll spend the day discussing just that story. It's helpful to have sometimes different brains to be able to think differently, because people have different strengths, weaknesses. Some people are funny, some people are more serious, some people are good with structure, some people are good with character, some people are great with romance, some people are great with action. And so to have that mix, oftentimes we're able to come up with a good story that has all of these elements, hopefully. And so when we have a clear goal at the beginning of the day, by the end of the day, we've achieved our goal, and then we move on to the next day with the new goal. And so that's typically, as an overview, that's what the writer's room is from the very basic view. There are specifics in that, but the way we look at it, and what I should say, my first slide.
Okay. Before you begin your first line, I will give you all of the opportunity and give the floor to you.
Yes. What I will do is go through my presentation and elaborate on the items that you see on screen. And Then when I'm finished, I will take questions, and you can ask anything you want, and I will do my best to answer. So, as I alluded to in speaking with Arif, the writing process is a very precious process in television. In the United States, it is a very important process. It is the most important process of long-form storytelling. In movies, they say the director is king, but in television and long-form storytelling, the writer is king. And the way we look at it is that the script is the soul of the project. And the reason for this is because it is the one thing that unites multiple stories is overall, what is the story you're trying to tell? So the storyteller is extremely important. And we always try to remember the script is the soul. Next slide, please. So I know that many of you come to ask the question, what is a writer's room? It can be, for some, a foreign concept, a different concept, and I hope to be able to explain a little bit that may allow for some explanation and some clarification as to what a writer's room is. So this photo is a photo of the writer's room for the show that I co-created in the United States, SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. And what you will see in this room, this is during a holiday, so there's a little bit different than a work day. Normally there aren't bottles of wine on the table when we're working, although many would like to have it. But this is a celebration. But what you see in this photo are all of our writers and some of our assistants. So the writer's room typically in the United States looks similar to this. It looks very much like a conference room with a long table and chairs around it. Not all of them look like this. Some writers' rooms look like more like a living room where it may have, a couch and chairs. But our writer's room at SWAT looks like this. You see the windows, the natural light, and behind everyone in back are our dry erase boards where we write our ideas. As we discuss our ideas, there is one person who is designated as the person who runs the room. Oftentimes that's me. I'm at the end of the table there. And we also have someone who's normally designated as a person who is writing on the board, who is putting up only the points that we all agree on that we like, and those points go up onto the board. And then there's also always a person who is designated as the person who takes notes. And in our situation, and in many writers' rooms, that is the writer's assistant, the person whose job is to sit and to take down almost everything that we say, but to keep track of the ideas that we may forget later. And so we gather in a room like this, normally at 10 a.m. every weekday, and we sit around this table and we discuss, and we'll have breaks at times, we'll have lunch. Oftentimes it's away from the room, but this allows us to have a space that's a creative space that allows us to be able to bounce ideas off of each other. If you notice in the back, there are photos on top of the wall and, above the dry erase boards. And those photos are photos of our actors, our cast for SWAT. We have them up because it reminds us as we come up with ideas for stories, who we're writing for and who the characters are that we love to tell stories about. And it gives us always a sense of reality of, these are not just ideas that we're coming up with, but these are ideas that actually have to be shot and have to be in dialogue that has to be said. So it's always good to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the writer's room, there are many elements that affect the writer's room. A few I just mentioned, such as the person who runs the room, the person who writes on the board, the person who takes the notes, which is the writer's assistant. What I should also mention before we move forward is that there are many different ways to do any of those roles. So for instance, actually, if we can go back to the previous slide for just a moment. For instance, when we look at the dry erase boards, some shows use dry erase boards, other shows may use note cards with corkboard. Some shows may use computer screens, but all of them have the same unifying element of having a visual reference, a common visual reference that we can all look to and track the ideas as we like the ideas. When writers' rooms occur online, on Zoom, for instance, it may be more of a shared document that everyone can see on Zoom. But it's helpful when you're working with a group to have a common visual reference that we can all look at and know exactly where we are in the story, so that we can all be on the same page. Next slide, please. Sorry, one back. Thank you. So in discussing the writer's room, there are many roles that influence a writer's room, three of which I mentioned before: the writer's assistant who takes notes, the person who writes on the board, and the person who runs the room. The two most important roles to any TV show are the role of the creator of the series and the role of the showrunner of the series. And that's what I will now discuss. Next slide, please. So, for full clarity, the creator of a TV show, I am a creator of a TV show, is the person who is contractually credited with the origin of the premise of the series. And what this means is that there's a contract that has my name on it that says that I get credited with, in this case, technically the development of SWAT, because SWAT is based on a show that actually originally aired back in the late 70s. Developed by is the same as created by, but there's a slight distinction in that the creator normally is the person who created the original version of whatever that property is. The creator of the series sometimes is also the showrunner, and I'll explain what a showrunner is, but it's not always the case. There are some people who create series and will move on to create other series and move on to create other series and may not have a desire to work on the show every day. There are others who, for whatever reason, it didn't work out and they moved on to different things. But the creator of the show is important because that's where everything started. The other most important role of a TV series, and probably the most important role of a TV series, is on our next card. So let's move on to the next one. So the most important role of any TV series is the showrunner. And the showrunner of a TV series is, simply put, the person who is responsible, the boss. They're responsible for pretty much every creative decision that goes into a TV series, from the scripts to the hiring of the writers, to the hiring of the directors, to the casting of the actors, to the way the music sounds, to the way the wardrobe looks, to the way the episodes are edited. Pretty much every creative decision, at least in the United States with TV shows, is determined by the showrunner. Sometimes the showrunner is also the creator of the series, but not always. And what this means is that there are some creators who also want to be showrunners. I am a creator and I am a showrunner. But not all creators want to be showrunners. Showrunning is a lot of hard work, a lot of decisions every single day, every minute, every hour. Requires a lot of responsibility and can often cause many, many headaches. But if you enjoy it, it is the job for you. If you do not, then some creators recognize that and move on to create other things. Sometimes a showrunner who is not a creator may be also someone who can run, who can be a boss of a show. There are times where a show can be created and someone who has experience being a boss can be added to the show in order to now run the show if the creator does not want to or it does not work out with the creator. If a showrunner is brought on or hired to run a show, normally it is because that showrunner is a very experienced writer, producer, and because they have a valued skill set of being able to address problems effectively and to be able to keep the show running in a productive and hopefully efficient manner. So the role of the showrunner is similar to the role of a director in movies in a way, is to keep the production, the creative side of the production running efficiently and as smoothly as possible. The showrunner is not a person who tends to work by themselves. The showrunner is a person who also relies on other very talented and smart people to also handle their responsibilities. But the showrunner for a TV show is the person who is typically at the top. Next slide, please. So now understanding some of the roles that are possible on a TV staff. We'll go into more detail about how a writer's room works. And keep in mind, you'll be able to ask questions at the end, so you'll be able to ask even in greater detail if you desire. But right now, we'll discuss how a writer's room works in a little more detail than I mentioned before. So how the writer's room works. Next slide, please. As stated before, a writer's room convenes every day, allows the writers to gather in a physical space or online. And especially this year, that's extremely important because very few writers' rooms are meeting physically in the age of COVID. And so what we found this year, in the year 2020, certainly in our SWAT writers' room, is that we tend to meet online in Zoom. We have Zoom rooms now, where I get up every morning, I come to this computer, I sit exactly where I'm sitting right now. We have a Zoom session where we can see everyone's faces, but the job is the same. Even though the space is different, the job is the same. We'll discuss and compare ideas. Different shows come up with different ideas. If your show is about vampires, you may have a different conversation than if your show is about police officers. Or if your show is about lovers from a city, that might be a very different conversation than if your show is about superheroes. But you come together to discuss, compare ideas. Oftentimes, writers have brought their own ideas into the room. They've done research, or they may want to talk about ideas that they've gotten from their lives, personal experiences, funny stories that they know about, or interesting stories or characters that they know about. And when we come together in a writer's room, there's a magic that happens because we start to get excited about the ideas that we can contribute. Typically ahead of time, before the writers convene, we have an idea of generally what type of story we're going to be talking about. So the showrunner ahead of time will meet with the writers and we'll discuss what do we want this season to be about, multiple episodes, and what do we want each episode to be about. And then before the writer's room convenes at the beginning of the day, we'll go over what do we want to accomplish today? What episode are we discussing? Let's say we are discussing the first episode of season 2. Well, we'll start to talk about what we want that episode to be about, what we want to achieve in this episode. And that's where the discussion and the comparing of ideas begins. There's an individual who runs the room. And that individual who runs the room sometimes is the showrunner. Sometimes is simply the senior writer who is in the room. So if the showrunner is busy doing other things, the person running the room may be the person who has the highest experience in the room, and oftentimes the highest title in the room. It's similar to the military in a way in the United States, in that there are rankings for the writers based on your experience typically. And so most of the time, the most experienced writer or the showrunner will run the room. And running the room means that you are the person who organizes the conversation. You're the person that keeps everything focused. If we know that we are talking about a particular story idea today and we need to get certain goals done by the end of the day, the person who runs the room is the person who keeps us on target, so that we don't get distracted too often. And even though we have fun and we have a good time, it's to make sure that we stay productive. So the person who runs the room has to be kind of the adult in the room. It's not always the funnest job, but it's the job that is necessary. So the person running the room typically sets goals that are established every day at the beginning of the day of what the room needs to accomplish by the end of the day. And the very best people who run rooms will not only set goals for each day, but they'll also set goals for the entire week. What do we want to accomplish by Friday? This is done for 2 reasons. One is to keep the group focused. And number 2 is to give the group a sense of accomplishment once we achieve those goals. So once we are done with our goals for the day, people feel good. We've accomplished what we needed to do. You go home, recharge, we come back the next day. If we've been able to accomplish what we are trying to do for the week, the same thing. You can go into your weekend feeling like you did your job. And it tends to allow the writers to know if they're doing a good job or not. Are we achieving the goals that we've set out to achieve? So it's very important for the individual who runs the room oftentimes to give the writing staff a sense of whether or not we are actually doing a good job and accomplishing what we set out to do. Next slide, please. So we've discussed some of what goes into a writer's room. We've discussed certain elements that go into a writer's room. That does not mean that every writer's room is a good writer's room. Some writer's rooms are not good. But we can discuss what makes a good writer's room. Next slide, please. So in any writer's room that I'm in, and this is subjective, people enjoy different elements that allow them to be their most productive. But for me, and in my experience, and I currently run a writer's room, and I've also been a part of many writer's rooms before this, from what I have seen, and this goes in any environment with human beings coexisting, is that the top priorities for any good writer's room are to have professional respect for each other. What that means is that it's easy to like good ideas when you hear them. It is challenging sometimes to hear bad ideas. And a respectful writer's room will know that even with bad ideas or ideas that are perceived as bad, they can still be very helpful. If the goal is as a team to work together to try to achieve goals by the end of the day, by the end of the week, by the end of the season, then it often helps if everyone feels as though they have a chance to contribute positively. And that often starts with when we hear ideas that perhaps are not the greatest or don't work, are there ways still to use that as a positive? There are ways to speak about good ideas and bad ideas in a room that allows us to continue to move forward. Nothing stops a conversation faster than to shut someone down by saying no. Oftentimes, an exercise in the room is similar to improv comedy, which is the rule of yes and, meaning even if I don't like that idea, I find it interesting. Yes, and perhaps we could do this. And at the end of the and, oftentimes it's an idea that can help that idea perhaps become better. That is the biggest challenge of a writer oftentimes, is finding ways to continue to be productive, even if you don't agree. Clarity of vision is another important bullet point, and this comes from the very, very top. Without a clarity of vision, and more importantly, being able to effectively communicate that vision, the writer's room oftentimes is lost. And that clarity of mission extends to per day, per week, per season. And then finally, there's a respect for time. And what this is, in essence, is the idea that even though if you're fortunate enough to have multiple artists who are working with you to achieve your dream and to try to tell good stories, then you also want to be respectful of the fact that they still have lives to live. And so that's why it's important oftentimes for a well-run room to be able to clearly articulate how much time we're going to need to get our job done, articulate what our goals are, and then to stick to the allotted time so that people can finish their work and go home and have lives. And this accomplishes two things. One thing is it keeps your staff happy. And the other thing is it keeps them refreshed, so that oftentimes human beings tend to be more productive when they're excited, when they're full of energy. And so allowing people to have time to spend with loved ones, to go and do other things is an important thing to remember. Next slide, please. So how to maintain good quality writing from the writer's room. So we've talked about certain elements that go into a writer's room. We talked about some of the most important bullet points to remember about how a good writer's room can run. But at the end of the day, none of it really means a lot if you don't actually have good writing that comes out of it. If you don't have good writing, you're probably not going to get to tell more stories. So it's very important, of course, to come out with the best writing possible. How do we maintain good writing from our writer's room? Next slide, please. Well, you start, number one, with making sure if you're going to write in a group and you're not going to write alone, it is extremely important to pick the right people for you to work with, if you have a choice. And that includes not only their skill set, meaning their ability to write, you want good writers, but perhaps just as important is their personality. How do people get along with each other? Groups are very different, and groups are organic. People, we all have, anyone who has siblings knows this. If you get two people in a room, their dynamic may be very different if you add two more people. The conversations may be different, the tone, the humor. And so anytime you add anyone to a group, you want to be mindful of how that affects the organism of the room. Hiring the right people, bringing the right people together, being able to recognize what people are best at is a very important skill for a leader, for a showrunner, for a producer. And so if you want to maximize the quality of writing, oftentimes it starts with not only choosing the best writers, but choosing the best mix of writers. If I've already hired someone who is really good at writing horror, I may not need 5 other writers who also do that well. I may need someone else who balances out and does romance, because perhaps I need both of those elements for my show. And I need to always keep that in mind. I need people who can bring different strengths so that when we come together, we can complement each other, we come up with the best stories. More important even than that is making sure at the very, very top, you've hired the right people. And that goes across the board. In television in the United States, the showrunner is not only responsible for the writing, we are responsible for production as well. We hire the directors. We hire the line producer who determines the budget and manages the budget. In any of these positions, it's very, very important to make sure that the right people are hired who agree with your vision of the show, or at least understand your vision of the show and can execute it and give you what you need in order to make the best show possible. If you're able to hire the right people at the very top, many of the other elements will take care of themselves. But these are very, very important decisions to be had at the very beginning if you want to have a successful writer's room and a successful TV series, long form television series. So these 2 bullet points are extremely important when it comes to making sure that we keep the quality of the show high consistently. Without these, many, many problems can come up if you hire the wrong person at all for any position. Sometimes it happens, you can't always predict. But certainly you want to put a lot of time into thinking about how you put your team together and how they work together, complement each other. Because that will save a lot of headaches down the road for the showrunner and for the show itself. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of things that I'm mentioning lend themselves to the idea of being as organized as possible. It is required. Not every showrunner is organized. Some showrunners are very messy. Some showrunners are forgetful. Some showrunners are not very responsible. There are many, many different ways to be a boss. As I'm sure you know, you think about the different bosses you've had over your life. Some are good at different things. It's the same thing with showrunners. Ideally, if you're in the position where you're managing a team of writers, you want to at least be able to recognize what your own strengths and weaknesses are. And you want to, as much as possible, try to maximize your own organization. So what I'll now talk about are certain tips that have helped me organizing myself, organizing our TV season, and organizing our writer's room. Next slide, please. So something to remember is, and this is very important, these are overviews when it comes to organization, is that no one comes out of the womb, no one is born a great leader or a great showrunner. It's a learned skill. And so oftentimes, even when you see people who are good at being a leader, just remember they were not always a good leader. That's something that they learned along the way. And so the goal is in being a writer who is in charge of other writers, managing other writers, is how can I learn and make sure that I am the best leader that I can be? Number one, going back to number one, the way to learn how to be a great leader, frankly, is to learn from great leaders if you can. Before I was a showrunner, I was a writer on other staffs. I worked for other showrunners. I learned from other showrunners. I learned from good showrunners. I learned from showrunners who made mistakes. And it taught me what to do, what not to do. Even if you don't have the opportunity to work for a showrunner, reading as much as possible about leadership and what makes good leaders, not just in writing, but everywhere. Military, politics, business, entertainment. Who are leaders that you admire, and you want to take away the qualities that you admire and build upon those and incorporate those into your own personal style. even as you do that, number two is an important point to remember, which is something I wish that I remembered more when I started, was don't be afraid to make mistakes. Being a good leader does not mean that you're perfect. It does not mean that you do not make mistakes. Even if you're really good and very experienced, you will make mistakes every single day. The question is will you learn from those mistakes? How well do you learn from those mistakes? That is what determines how good you are. It's not the lack of mistakes, it's how you respond to mistakes. So I find myself every day making mistakes, but I try to not make the same mistakes over and over. I try to learn from the mistakes that I make, and I try to learn and pay attention to why I made the mistake. That humility, to remain humble, to realize that you are not perfect and you never will be, is very important in a job of being a showrunner, managing writers. Oftentimes, the people that work for you will appreciate humility if you acknowledge that you are not perfect. That sometimes I often tell them, that was my mistake. We could do this better, or even sometimes when people who work for me make mistakes, sometimes I'll take the mistake for them. I'll say, that was not your failure. That was mine for not being a good enough leader and showing you how to do it. And so oftentimes, again, that can help to build team chemistry, so people understand that you want the best for them and you want to maximize their skills. And then often it reminds the leader that at the end of the day, mistakes are not something to be afraid of. They're something to learn from. They're learning opportunities. That's what they are. It hurts not to know everything in the world, because it reminds you of how much you have to learn. But in order to learn, you have to be able to acknowledge that there are things that you don't know. And no matter how long you do this job, there are always things that you can learn. Number three, with all of this, is even if you're learning to be a leader and you're not afraid to make mistakes and you're trying not to be afraid to make mistakes, it is good, just for clarity, to be decisive in your intentions. What are you trying to accomplish? Be able to clearly articulate to the people that work for you and the people that work with you exactly what you're trying to achieve. Creatively, story-wise, oftentimes that manifests itself in a way where you're able to talk about the types of stories that you want to tell. The goal of the day, the goal of the week. When someone has a question about, should we do A or should we do B, you should have a thoughtful idea of why you choose B or why you choose A. But you want to be decisive. As the leader, everyone is looking to you for a direction. And oftentimes one of the worst things that can happen is when the team feels directionless, aimless. So that's where the role of the head writer, a showrunner, is very similar in some ways to a film director. You don't want hundreds of people whose job depends on you making decisions to feel as though they have no direction to go. Oftentimes that can build up fear and anxiety, and also it can cause chaos, which is the enemy of what you're trying to achieve on a TV show. So being decisive is very helpful and ideal. Number 4, being honest. This does not always mean necessarily telling the truth, by the way. Being honest means be self-aware. Try to be aware of what's going on around you. Try to be aware of yourself, your own faults, the things that you know are challenging for you. By doing this, it will keep you humble, but also allow you to effectively handle and look at approaching problems in the best way, because that leads directly to number 5. As I said before, working on a television show with multiple writers, working on a writing staff is a large job. It requires more than one person. And because of that, you often are required to delegate responsibilities. We call it feeding the machine because there's so much content that has to be created. We're in a world right now where we have streaming all over the world. Netflix, Amazon, HBO. There's so much content, movies, TV, blogs, web series. There's so much content, so much to do oftentimes that when you work with a team, if you're going to work with a team, it only makes sense if you're willing to trust the team. So if you have hired the right people, the people that you feel are best for this job, then you have to be honest with yourself to be able to trust them with the jobs you've chosen them for. And you have to be willing to delegate responsibility, to trust them to do their job. At the end of the day, if you're the boss, it still resides with you. The final decision just resides with you. But since you can't be in all places at one time, you can't do everything, delegating responsibilities to people that you respect and that you trust are essential in order to survive, to keep your own emotional peace, and to make this the best show possible. There are many times where even if you are the leader, it does not mean that you always have the best ideas. And if someone else has a good idea, part of being honest with yourself is recognizing when someone else may have a better idea and being okay with acknowledging that. Not everybody does that. There are many people that struggle with that. But I find that the best leaders, the best showrunners are secure within themselves to be able to draw upon the strengths of their team and make everything stronger by adding the creativity from the group. So delegating is easier said than done, but it's very important. You know, many people work very, very hard to get a TV show on the air or a movie, you know, to the point where it can be finished. And sometimes you can work so hard that it's hard to trust anyone else with your baby. But oftentimes, in order to make it the best that it can be, delegating is required, and it helps to be able to recognize that. Next slide, please. So, we're given an overview as far as how a room works, some of the most important aspects of trying to keep up the quality of the writing from the writer's room. Well, that's only one part of the writer's room. There's the physical setup of a writer's room. There are the people in the writer's room. There are the different roles of people in a writer's room. There are the important bullet points to remember to run an effective writer's room. But there's also purely, practically, just the idea of managing a writer's room. And that's what we'll discuss now. Next slide, please. So, as I stated before, a writer's room is a living, breathing organism. And if you think about it, think about when you gather with your friends, think about when you gather with your family. Depending on who you are in a room with and talking to, the conversation will feel different. Anytime you get human beings together, it's a living, breathing organism that is constantly shifting and changing depending on who is in the room. So when you're looking to put together the room, and as I was saying before, you want to make sure that you have the right pieces that fit with the right pieces, different skill sets, and also different types of personalities. You may not want a room full of 5 or 6 people who all love to argue. That may be a lot of yelling if you do that. Or maybe you enjoy that. Maybe that's exactly what you like, depending on your taste. You also don't want a writer's room, perhaps, that has 5 or 6 people who don't like to talk. That might be tough to have a conversation with 5 or 6 people that don't like to talk, unless you're a really quiet person and you really love quiet. That might be your preference. I tend to find that a balance is often helpful. So if we have a few people that love to talk, I don't mind balancing that out with a few people who are a little more internal. If we have a few people who love to make jokes, I don't mind having a few other people that are more serious. If we have some people who are married with children, it may be okay to have other people who are single and dating. Different mix, different points of view, different walks of life. Some people who are wealthy, some people who are not. Some people are very experienced as writers, some people who have never written before. It all depends. But some tips for evaluating the different individuals that you might consider as part of your writing team and this is something I've had to do a lot of the last few years, is you definitely want to read what they have to offer, their material. This means oftentimes, at least on a TV show in the United States, that may mean a screenplay, that may mean a spec pilot that they've written, one-act play, short story. I've even seen people have poetry that is good, that people enjoy. But you want to get a sense of what the writer can do. How do they write? What is their voice? What type of writer is this? What are they good at on the page? So that gives you a sense, at least, of what their skill set might be with the writing aspect. B, and this is something I haven't talked about yet, is the idea of who is your lieutenant. If you're the boss of the show, you're the showrunner, you typically want there to be what we call the number two, who is someone that you trust, who is your lieutenant, who understands the vision of the show, the voice of the show, who, if you need to step away and do other things, is probably the person who will be running the room at times if you are not there. And oftentimes is the person who can do heavy lifting when you are not present. So the number two typically is an experienced writer who's handled problems before, and is a person who is in line with you and is a person that you trust. C is something I've mentioned before, which is, in addition to having read material of the writers, in addition to having your lieutenant in place. And by the way, I should say, when talking about hiring your number two, your lieutenant, and I'll get to this a little bit later, but you want to have that person in place as early as possible in the process so that the two of you as a team can then hire everyone else, in theory. So when you get to C and you start to look at personalities in a room, well, a lot of that is human nature. What types of personalities do you want in a room? As I was saying before, do you want to balance it out with some people were like this and some people were like that? Or do you really, really like chaos and you want people who are going to challenge each other? Or do you really like quiet and you want people that are going to be respectful of each other and speak only when necessary? Or, or something else, but you want to ask yourself, what type of personalities do I want in a room? And how can I now hire personalities who will also work well together? It's not just about you, the showrunner, but it's how do they fit with each other? And then D, which is very important for me personally, and I wish was more important than why you were firing them. The advance contract is not literally a contract. It's not something someone signs. It's not a piece of paper. It's simply effective communication to be able to say, this is what I expect of you before we begin this job. And then as they do the job, to be able to let them know you're doing a good job or you're not. And then by the end of this, to let them know you did a great job. Thank you. Or let them know you did not do a great job based on what we agreed to in the very beginning. But if they do not have the understanding in the beginning, then it's difficult for them to understand whether or not they're doing a good job for you. At the end of this is something that is very important when it comes to groups of people working together, which is, I find it very important to have a no asshole policy, which means exactly that, pretty much. You want people that you enjoy working with. That doesn't mean you're always going to agree. You may disagree. Hopefully it's respectfully disagree. But you also don't want people who are going to be disruptive to the point of the work being inhibited or individuals feeling as though they can't do the best job they can. So you want to try to be attuned to who is working well with others, who is not. Sometimes you have a good staff. We have a great staff at SWAT. But not every show has that luxury. And so as much as possible, if you're going to work with a group, it's very important to try to avoid having any assholes in the group if you can. Sometimes you can't, but you try. Try not to have any assholes. Next slide, please. So as a leader, when you're bringing these elements together, and we've touched upon it a little bit before, you want to have a clear, creative, and tonal vision. And perhaps just as important, you want to be able to clearly articulate what your vision is. Now, what is a vision? Vision is what this slide says, which is, that's what the show is about at its core. What is the show about? And I don't just mean, what is the premise? You know, for instance, there's a show, Game of Thrones, right? That came on, right? If you ask some people, what is Game of Thrones about? What is the vision of that show? Some people will say it's about dragons and people with swords. But that's not really the vision of the show. That's what's in the show. The vision of that show, at the core of it, I would say it's about power. It's the Game of Thrones. Who can earn the throne? And it's constantly about people trying to maneuver in order to earn the throne, to win it, no matter what. So that is a show that at its core, from the beginning to the very end, is constantly about who can grab as much power as possible and how willing are they to get that power. That is a vision for a show. Not every show has a vision, but the best shows tend to. And if you are creating a show with a group of writers, it's very important that you understand that's what allows you to be the leader. What is this show about at its core? What it gives you and it gives the writers is a clear idea of what's the target to aim when I'm trying to come up with ideas for this show. If this show at the core is about the pursuit of power, then my pitches, meaning the ideas that I come up with in the writer's room, should probably have something to do with the pursuit of power, because that's what the show is about. Now, in addition to that, because that is already that can be its own complex exercise, is trying to make sure the writers on staff understand what the vision of the show is, giving them a chance to be able to come up with ideas and effectively pitch them. But also you want to be clear separately about what the culture of the room is. So there's the vision of the show, which is, what is the show about? At the core, what is the show about? Like what aside from, there's another show, The Walking Dead, that some people say, oh, that's about zombies. But that's just what's in the show. At the core of the show, it's more about human survival, right? It's like, what do people do when society breaks down? How do they survive? Do relationships continue as they did before, or do we turn into animals? You know, that's what the show is about. So being clear about the vision is one thing. Being clear about the culture of the room is something else. So if the room is a living, breathing organism that changes whenever elements are added or subtracted, then the culture of the room is very much dependent on what you as a leader allow. And what that tends to mean is what behavior is acceptable in this room. Is this a respectful room? Or is this a room where rude behavior is allowed? Is this a room where we make jokes at others' expense? Or is this a room where we're very complimentary of each other? Is this a room where we tend to tell edgy stories that might be about our deep, darkest secrets? Or is this a room where we're a little more reserved? That is a culture of the room, whatever the answer to those questions are. And the leader of the room tends to determine that by setting the tone. The leader of the room is the person who allows different types of jokes to be told, or is the person that can say, no, we don't do that here, you know, or laughs at somebody else's, you know, story, which gives them permission to continue to talk, or doesn't allow for another type of story because it might be offensive. It's setting the boundaries of the writer's room. What type of discussion is allowed and what is considered out of bounds. Oftentimes that's determined very early on. With a group of writers and with human beings, we're constantly taking cues from each other. We're not only listening to each other talk, we're also looking at how each other how we express ourselves with bodily language, with eye contact, with sense of humor, all of these things. Within the first week, oftentimes the culture of the room can be established. What type of room is this? We have an era that has come up in Hollywood the past few years, the Me Too movement, where we found that there were many people, men for the most part, who were misbehaving. Well, the culture of their workspaces were determined by their behavior. A lot of times that was the behavior that they encouraged was not the safest, not the most productive, not the most supportive. And so that shows you how much power a leader can have over determining what the culture of the room is. And so the vision is essential, being able to clearly articulate what the vision of your show is, but equally as important, it can determine whether your show is going to survive, whether people are going to continue to want to work for you or with you, is determining what the culture of the show is. Oftentimes that is based on your personality, but sometimes you can adjust that based on what type of environment you want this to be. Creatively, at the end of the day, what those two elements combine to create is the tone of your show. Is your show a dark show? Not just literally, but thematically? Or is your show more uplifting and positive? On SWAT, we are a show that's about police officers who carry around big guns and dress in black and do a lot of action, but we are also an aspirational show. So we are a show that typically likes to try to project hope. We oftentimes, most of the time, we end up saving the day. We end up defeating the bad guy. We end up trying to present a solution. That's the tone of that particular show. Not every single show has the same tone. Some shows, the tone may be more tragic, where the show is about perhaps cycle of violence that never ends, or like I said, with a show like The Walking Dead might be more about the breakdown of society. Sometimes there are triumphs and sometimes there are losses. It's not always aspirational. Sometimes there are dark elements. So for you as the showrunner, as the leader of writers, it is important for you to understand your vision, understand what type of culture you want to establish for the room, and to creatively understand what the tone of your show is. You don't have to have all of the answers before you hire writers and meet with writers, but it is good to at least have an idea of where you want to go. And it may continue to develop, but you should, for the most part, try to have an idea of what type of tone you want for your show, because that'll help your writers understand what they're walking into. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just went over this, but setting the tone, when you're in charge, you get to decide how things are going to work. And not just creatively, but practically, organizationally. Is your show the type of show that allows people to have their weekends off, where they don't work? Is your show the type of show where people can break for lunch and go somewhere else and don't have to eat with the other writers? Some shows require that we work through lunch, that we continue to talk about story even as we eat. I don't require that. I feel as though it's good to have a break, rest your mind, go think about other things. But there's no right or wrong. It's all subjective. It's all based on the individual. What does the individual want? Organizationally, is your show the type of show that takes holidays to make sure that the writers have time off to spend with their families? All of these things, the tone is set from the top, and not just creatively, but also, again, organizationally. What type of show are you running? What type of environment do you want your writers to work in? Next slide, please. So that leads us to a very practical point, which is when it comes to a writing staff, writers are notorious for being interesting individuals, sometimes nervous individuals, sometimes filled with anxiety. Oftentimes that can be exacerbated by having a lack of clarity over what they're expected to do and what their schedule is. And so what you can do when you're putting together a writing staff, when you are the leader, the showrunner, is to be very clear with the writers and clear and simple about what their schedule is. You want to have a vision not only of what the story is, but you want to have a vision and a plan of what the writing schedule is. As I said before, the writing staff will meet every day. We'll meet at about 10 a.m. We'll go to about 6 p.m. We'll have a lunch break in between and various breaks throughout. Well, you also want to have a clear vision for how do we want to plan out the season? Not just story-wise, but organizational-wise, schedule-wise. Where you tend to start with that is you want to have an idea of when do we need to have these episodes finished by? If we're planning to shoot the episodes already, when do we have to have them shot? When do we have to have them edited? When do we have to have them on the air? And oftentimes, if you have all of that information, you can work your way back. If you know that a show needs to be on the air by June, you can work your way back to how much time you need to edit it, how much time you need to shoot it, therefore how much time you need to write it, therefore how much time you need to break it, put it together. And once you have those dates, which requires a lot of work by the showrunner, and oftentimes the number two may help with that. But once you have those dates and you're able to come up with a chart as to what those dates are, then you can let your writers know what the schedule is. We need to break episode 2 by this date, and then start on episode 3, finish episode 3 by this date, and start on episode 4, finish episode 4 by this date, and so on and so forth. And on some writing staffs, we do this certainly on my show on SWAT, it helps even further to be able to let a writer know which episode they're going to write ahead of time so that they can already start to think about ideas and think about what their life is going to look like. If a writer knows, for instance, that they're going to write episode 5, and episode 5 is we're going to break episode 5 weeks from now, and we're going to shoot episode 5 2 months from now. Well, that writer can already start to plan. If I know I'm writing episode 5, I want to have ideas ready, make sure I'm ready so that when we discuss episode 5, I have plenty of ideas. If we're going to shoot episode 5 and I'm going to produce it, the writer meaning, then I may need to block out time 2 months from now so that I can be available so that I can produce my episode. You can start to plan ahead. Not all shows do this, but I find that it helps writers oftentimes if you can give them clear information on what will be expected of them schedule-wise. So it relieves the anxiety, the uncertainty, gives them more clarity of what to expect. Next slide, please. So in addition to some of the practical considerations, coming up with a writer's schedule, being able to effectively communicate that to the writers, what will also help when you're working with a group of writers, a writer's room, is to also be able to clearly not only articulate what your vision is, but to help the writers execute that vision. Oftentimes, what can help is for writers to be proactive. That includes the showrunner. That means that even when we're not in the writer's room, try to come in with ideas. What are newspaper articles that you've read that you found interesting? What are ideas that you have from hanging out with your friends or your family that you find may be helpful for a story? Oftentimes when the creator has created the show, one of the things that you may have been required to do was to initially come up with examples of different types of episodes. Well, when you actually start to work with writers on your show, those ideas can come in handy. You can now start to suggest, maybe for episode 3, we could do this idea that I came up with when we pitched it. Some showrunners are more like dictators, where they determine this is what this episode will be about. This is what this episode will be about. This is what this episode will be about. And some showrunners, like on SWAT, we give our writers a little more freedom. I may suggest, this is an interesting idea. Consider this, but I want you to be excited about what you're writing. So what are your ideas for this episode? And then we'll discuss whether or not that idea works for what we're trying to do. But because in long form storytelling, there are multiple stories. This isn't a movie. This isn't one episode. This is multiple. You need the best ideas possible ready to go in order to tell the best stories that you can. And so stocking up on those ideas even before you get into the room is essential and very important to have. Next slide, please. So we talked before, earlier, about this idea of delegating responsibility, meaning a leader being humble and wise enough to be able to delegate, give responsibility to those who you trust, those who you've hired to do their jobs. Well, that also applies to in the room. It applies across the board to all facets of production. Your line producer who's determining your budget and keeping track of your budget, your directors who you hire, your crew, your editors, your head of post. But it also requires delegating within the room itself. So we discussed that you want to have someone who can lead things when you're not there. You're number 2, right? That person has to be able to hold things down when you're not in the room. And what that means is they need to be able to keep progress moving forward in a way that is productive. Coming up with stories, ideas that are good for the show that you would like yourself. And that requires, again, someone then, a number 2, who knows your taste and understands the vision of the show. You also, you want to be honest about who you are as a leader. We talked about that before, being honest about what your strengths and weaknesses are, so that when you select a number 2, ideally you're selecting someone who complements you. In a perfect world, you select someone who is good at something you're not good at. You don't really need 2 versions of yourself. You need someone who understands your vision, who can execute your vision, but preferably someone who has a different worldview, perhaps has a different life experience, so that they can bring things that may be a blind spot for you. If you're a man, it may be good to have a woman who is your number 2. Or if you're a woman who's the boss, it may be good to have a man who's a number 2. You have different life experiences. You can perhaps complement each other when it comes to working on things. And that's just one example. You also want to make sure that the roles are clear. When we talk about delegating in the room, within the room itself, you want to be able to, off of the advanced contract, being able to communicate with the writers what their roles are. You want them to be clear on what their roles are. And like the military, there needs to be a clear delegation of authority. Some writers' rooms are like round tables, figuratively, not necessarily literally, where everyone's opinion perhaps is valued equally. Some writers' rooms, so I would say if that's a writer's room that's, well, for the people, let's say. That's a writer's room where everyone values their opinion on the same level, whether you're more experienced or not. There are some writers' rooms where there's a clear hierarchy. The more experienced that you are, the more authority you have. And the more airspace you get to discuss. And then some writers' rooms might be a mix of both, depending on what episode you're breaking. So if you're breaking the episode of a writer who has less experience, it may be that they have more authority with their episode because it's their episode. But on other episodes, it's the writer who's writing who has the most authority. But that's determined by the culture of the room, by the culture of the show. That's the fourth part of this, which is it's dependent on the tone of the show. There are some rooms where a different person may run the room based on what episode you're breaking, because that's the tone of that show. That's the way that show has been set up. On our show, on SWAT, what we tend to do is we have myself or another executive producer who runs the room, but we give heavy emphasis to the writer of the episode. We try to give them a lot of creative freedom. Want to know what ideas they have for their episode, want to make sure they have plenty of space to speak, to be heard. And so in many ways, we rely on the writer of the episode to help drive the conversation so that we make sure that if the person's going to write the episode, they have a genuine interest and investment, emotional investment in that particular episode. Next. Thank you. So I've brought up this term a few times, breaking a story. And I feel like I should probably actually break down what that term means. If you haven't heard it before, you may have heard it. But when I use the term story breaking a story, it does not mean that we are literally breaking the story so it won't work. What it tends to mean is breaking a story is building a story. Story building is what it is. And so what you're looking for when you come together as a writer's room, as a group of writers, and if the writers understand what the creative vision is, and we understand what the goal is for the day, and we understand what the goal is for the week, and what the episode is supposed to be about, well, then we can look to start to put together ideas for the best scenes for this episode. And that's called story breaking, story building. How do we want to approach this episode? What are the most interesting moments that we want to see in this episode? What are the things that we want to put our characters through? What are the character arcs that we want to play? What is the plot of our story? SWAT is a cop show. So we're unusual though as a cop show because most cop shows actually start with the idea of a plot. What is the crime? What is the mystery? How do we solve it? With SWAT, we do it backwards. We oftentimes will start with character. What do we want this character to experience? This is the episode where one character has their heart broken. And how do we want that to play out? And how does their feelings on having their heart broken affect them when they're working the case? But in breaking a story, we're talking about all of these elements, the plot, character arcs. And then if you're really, really good, and oftentimes it comes later, is you can even get to themes. I hesitate to discuss themes too early because if you discuss a theme too early, this episode is about hate. This episode is about family. Sometimes it can start to force you to make the story fit the theme instead of just telling the best story and then recognizing what the theme of that story is later. So we often look for our themes later once we've come up with what the story is, the character arcs, the plot. Now, in the beginning, when you first start to break a story, you come in with all of these intentions of what you would like to do, what type of story you would like to tell, what type of character arcs you would like to tell. As you discuss things with your writers, you may find that those ideas evolve. You may have had that starting point. That doesn't mean that's going to be your end point. You may have started off wanting to tell a story about a character having their heart broken, but when you started to discuss things with your writers, maybe we all started to decide it's better if this is actually a story about two people falling back in love, not having their hearts broken, but they find that why they like being together. Or Or you may reverse on a plot idea. This was a story about, saving the town from the bad guys, but we feel like maybe it would be more interesting if you flipped it and the bad guys won in this episode, and that leads to a cliffhanger, and you can evolve. It's a living, breathing organism, but you want to come in with a clear starting point. What are we trying to achieve? And then that gives us a foundation to start on, and the writers can then discuss as a group, and we see if it is the best way to tell the story. Next slide, please. If you should decide that you are curious about working in a writer's room or arranging one, I thought what might be helpful as well, and certainly it'll help not to hear my voice so much, you can hear somebody else's, is to toss out a few scenarios that are hypothetical situations based on what we just talked about. And I think from this, what you get a sense of are different ways to handle different situations. There is no right or wrong. There are only different styles. So with that said, Gina, are you there? So I think most of you know. Hello. So I think almost everybody probably knows you, right? So no introduction probably is necessary, but
yes.
I will toss out a few scenarios for you, just so that people can hear how a writer and artist would handle certain things that sometimes are common in writers' rooms. So what I'll do is I'm going to read the scenario, and then Gina will give her answer as to how she would handle.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm nervous.
Oh, there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong.
Okay.
Except for murder. You can't murder anybody. But so scenario number one. All of these, by the way, are common scenarios that have either happened to me in real life or are scenarios that I'm aware of that have happened in real life. So these are all real. So scenario number one is what I call the whistleblower. So this is directed at Gina. So you're a first-time showrunner, which means that you are now management and not privy to the same writer's room gossip that you might have been when you were a writer on a staff or working for somebody else. A high-level writer contacts you about a possible cancerous element, possible cancerous elements in the room. You, as a leader, haven't seen any evidence of this, but the writer insists it's there and that it will become a problem if it's not addressed. What do you, as a leader, do?
Okay. This is like leadership test, right? Okay. Maybe at first I will give some time to see if there's any evidence to the gossip or the complaint that given to me. What I usually do, I need tangible facts. So maybe the tangible, what I mean is like deadlines and how he or she perform in the writer's room, and how the person influence the culture of the writer's room. That's what I'm gonna do. After that, if it happened, I think I need to talk with him or her one-on-one first to see do she or him realize that he is the source of the problem. But if it didn't happen, maybe I asked the person who talked to me if there's a different kind of expectation to the team or the another members of the team. Yeah.
Great. So how this relates to what we talked about before is that your approach seems to be a very sensible approach in wanting to get the real story and then trust your writers and their opinions as to how to actually solve the problem, which I favor too. There are some showrunners who will immediately only trust the high-level writer and that's it, no matter what. But there's so many different ways to do it that sometimes determining how you approach the answer to these can determine exactly what type of leader, what type of tone you would set for your own show. Scenario number 2.
Okay.
What's the... No.
Next.
Oh, thanks. Okay. So, some of these I have to remember myself. Here's another one, a little different. The blind spots. So, in this case, Gina, you are a first-time showrunner, and you are running a writer's room. And a lower-level writer seems to joke about your behavior being sexist or racist. What do you do?
Okay. I think as a showrunner, maybe it will be good if we set the standard first. What it means to be sexist, what it means to be racist, so everybody have the same knowledge and standard of the case. Yeah, and in my experience, we even have this like non-disclosure agreement and this legal options that they sign about this. Okay, but if they give okay, I think there are two options if we see this case. It's like a long-term solution or a short-term solution. If it's short-term solution, maybe I just give them to remind them. It's like the first warn to their behavior. But if it becomes routine for the member of the team, or it being toxic for another member of the teams, maybe I'm gonna cut them. Yeah.
Nice. Somebody just lost a job. You hear that? Rough. Well, it's an excellent answer. What it reminds me of is coming back to the idea of having an advanced contract, meaning an agreement on what is expected of the people who work on the show. What is considered inbounds, what is considered out of bounds. If there is an understanding of that early before we start, then hopefully there's no confusion over behavior that might be considered offensive, because we've established what is allowed in this room. So there shouldn't be any surprises if that has been clearly articulated.
But Aaron, can I ask something? What if we make a series that really is a satire comedy, or it's talking about a more edgy, and not really moral appropriate, how we build, how we open the development team that, can have a freedom, but yet still on this, not being sexist or racist. Meanwhile, if I don't know what happened if I write like Borat.
Yeah. So it's an excellent question, but it's the same thing because it simply determines it's a different parameter, right? If the tone of your show is edgier and you're looking to do humor or content that will be a little more mature, or graphic, then you still want to determine that, right, from the very beginning. This is the type of show we are. This is a show where we can tell colorful jokes, dirty jokes. We can be edgier as long as the writers understand that from the beginning, so that allows them then to gives them permission. If they want to do jokes about anything that might be considered edgy, they know they can do that here. It's okay. But then you also still probably want to determine, okay, if I'm doing an edgy show, is there anything that's out of bounds or is everything allowed? Because there are some shows that might be edgy, but that doesn't mean that one writer can get personal with another writer, or they can start to talk about their parents, or their children. There are some shows that might be okay with that. Here, nothing is out of bounds. You can tell me my kid is ugly if you want, and it'll be okay. On some shows, you tell another writer their kid is ugly, there may be problems. So you just want to be clear from the very beginning. What are the parameters? What type of show are we, and what do we allow?
Okay. Sorry, Aaron. I think I need to ask you about this question because I have this. I think there are two. I have two slides here. So, do you mean with this scenario? Do you mean that the lower level writer seems to joke about me as a showrunner being sexist or racist, or they making sexist or racist joke about me? I think I have two different slides about this scenario.
In this particular scenario, they are saying you. They're saying that you are the sexist one, you are the racist one. But it seems like they're joking. You don't know if they're serious or not.
Yeah.
But they are accusing you.
Okay. Maybe if that's the scenario, I'm just talk to them first. Okay. And let me talk in bahasa Indonesia first. Teman-teman, if you read, teman-teman kalau baca slide yang bahasa Indonesia, berarti ada perbedaan antara terjemahan dengan apa yang ada di layar saat ini. Oke. Kalau di skenario, it's two different thing. Kalau di slide bahasa Indonesia itu tentang jokesnya tentang membuat guyonan rasis terhadap saya, bukan keluhan terhadap saya gitu. Terima kasih. So Aaron, I just have disclaimer to the audience first.
Okay. Did you tell them that you would fire the writer still?
Huh? Well, no, if I'm the one who people tell me, okay, your behavior is being sexist or racist, I'm just talk to them first, I clarify what happened. Yeah. So what I answered before is with the context of the slide in bahasa Indonesia.
Excellent. Okay, the next scenario. Oh yes. So this is very common. This one is. I've been guilty of this myself, but not very often. I try not to do this. This is the rewriter, also known as the micromanager. So you are a first-time showrunner, and you've done a smart thing, and you've delegated responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities is allowing a high-level writer to do rewrites on scripts when needed before they get to you.
Mm-mm.
When some of their rewrites turn out to be more extensive than might be necessary, possibly ruffling feathers with other writers on staff, what do you do?
Okay, I was had a very first script when did it consider to be extensive. Okay, this happened a lot.
Yeah, I think this is common in many, many places.
Yeah, this is very common. Well, I think in Wahana Creator we have this a notes every time we finish the development meeting. Yeah. And there will be some checkpoint for the revision or what is the premise of the episode and stuff like that. And especially on that episode, what is the character arc for at the moment. So maybe before we see the rewrite, before we make it more more emotional when we read the script, we must see how is the development meeting
Note.
you know, how is the note, and we need to compare it because the note is, you know, how we that's what we finalize about the revision. I think that yeah. Because what happened sometimes the junior writers cannot deliver the revision that we expected to.
I see. Yes. That happens. Yes, that happens often. They have to learn. So that is a very, very common scenario that I find that happens. So for anyone who is considering a writer's room or working with one or organizing one, to have an answer for this scenario is a good exercise. Scenario number 4. Okay. So this one has no title. It is just scenario number 4. You're a first-time showrunner. The studio or whoever's supplying the money encourages you to hire a strong number 2. And you decide to bring your friend on for emotional support. You bring in also an experienced producer as a consultant. And 2 weeks in, your friend is ruining the room and you're behind in schedule. What do you do?
Okay. Is this happened to you?
Maybe.
Well, it was me, you know. I think for me the most important is to deliver the quality of the show. Yeah. So and if you are a friend with him or her, you can talk to them, you know, as a friend first, to talk that there are some certain expectation that you cannot deliver for this show. And there always be, I think there always be some position to people to learn. Maybe if we level down the expectation, maybe she or him can be she or he can be, you know, be more deliver, and we can see the potential of them. the right man on the right place. That's the most important. Yeah.
Yes, I think you bring up a good point. Is that I think being very clear about, again, the expectations of what you need from that person are so important, so that if you do need to evaluate them or fire them, it can be very clear why, the reasons why, what they have failed to do. But I agree. As a producer, as an executive producer, as a showrunner, most showrunners, if you ask them what is their least favorite part of the job, their least favorite part of the job is firing people. But I find that it can become a lot easier if you have already explained what the expectations are, and therefore explain to them why they're being fired. It's not because I don't like you, it's because you did not live up to what the expectations are. And it gives them a fair chance, hopefully, to improve.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to ask you first, Aaron, before we move to the next scenario. So when you hire your team member, how so you read their scripts, but then their final script can be someone rewrite it for them, because how the previous writer's room before when he or she worked there. But so how do you recognize the skill within that person? Do you need some resume or good letters from previous showrunner?
I tend to find that the best resumes, first you become a little bit of a detective. So I read, I may read a script, but oftentimes I may want to read more than one script, just to make sure, this person is as good as I think that they are. In addition to that, perhaps just as important is I want to talk to someone who they worked with or worked for. If it's a small business, oftentimes there aren't many writers who write for television. Chances are, if you've worked with some experience, you probably know someone who knows that person, or know someone who knows someone who knows that person. But I tend to find that it's very helpful to talk to someone who worked with them directly to try to get the real story. What is this person's work habits like? What is this person really good at? When they speak to you, they're going to speak to you with their best face. They're going to be very respectful. But talking to someone who worked with them, you might be able to get the real story. It's like, I know they were respectful to me. What were they like when they worked with you? It's like, well, actually, when they worked with me, he was very rude, even though he was very nice when he talked to me as a showrunner. I try to get the recommendations, the personal recommendations, I find are very, very important, in addition to reading multiple writing samples if possible. And then even with all of that, at the end of the day, it still is a bit of a gamble, right? Some people may have great samples. You may have heard a great recommendation, but for whatever reason, when you bring them to work with you, they're not great. And it may be because they're at a different place in life. Something happened to them recently, or just may be that, we missed the evaluation. We didn't read the right things and didn't talk to the right people. I think if you put it in the work, though, most of the time you will find good candidates. If you do a little bit of detective work, 9 times out of 10, you'll find the right candidates. Every once in a while, you'll find someone who's good enough to seem like a good candidate. And then here's another thing that people don't always think about. Sometimes someone may be a great candidate, but if the room is a living, breathing organism. If you put them in the room with other people who they do not connect with, they may be a great candidate somewhere else, but in this room, not so great, because they have different views, or, different sense of humor, different likes, sometimes even different taste in food. you know,
They're
if
good
we
with
eat
model.
together. Yes. So it is a bit of a gamble, even if you do all of your homework, but it definitely helps to do the homework, to try to get as much information as possible. And I do look at it as a little bit as becoming a little bit of a detective, trying to find out the things that are not always apparent. And it tends to pay off. It helps.
Okay. So,
Yeah,
so
I was also want to ask the same question about just what Gina was asking about the quality of the member of the staff.
Yes.
But actually, you already answered it, because I want to ask about the personality and the attitudes. Gina was asking about the quality of the writing, but I think the same method works.
Yeah. But how then you mix the expertise in your writers' room? Like you said, some writers good at structure, some good at characters and genres. How do you mix them? How you prioritize the quantity of the team?
It depends. It depends on the vision of your show.
Okay.
So if you know, and it comes down to your individual taste. So, for instance, to use SWAT as an example, it's a police show, but we do a lot of character story. I knew even when we were putting our writing staff together that because it is a police show with character, we have 12 writers. We know that we're going to need a good number of writers who know how to write action. So of those 12, we need at least 3 to 4 writers who know how to do action really well, so that even if some writers are not in the room, some writers are off to write or to produce, we'll always have at least one writer in the room based on the numbers who knows how to do action really, really well.
Okay.
Right? And then our show is not just about action, it's also about family and about character. So we need other writers who are good with character, who know how to write good scenes between mothers and daughters and fathers and sons and families, and sometimes victims who have lost things, And the same thing, out of 12 writers, we might need another 4 that we know for sure are good at character.
Okay.
And then that's already 8. Of the last 4, we may need writers who are a mix. Someone who definitely can do humor, well. Someone who definitely at least a writer or 2 who are really good at structure, And there are some writers that are good at it all, but there are some writers who may not be great with character, but they're really, really good at laying out the plot, being able to tell you exactly what you need, like putting together a puzzle. And they can be helpful. But when putting together the numbers, what's helpful is to think about how many people will be in the room and making sure that you have all the elements you need at all times in the room. So we knew that we're not going to always have all 12 writers in the room. Sometimes we will lose writers to other responsibilities. So we wanted enough writers with different skill sets so that even if we only have 4 writers in the room, one of them will probably be good at action. One of them will probably be good at character. One of them will probably be good with structure. Another one will probably be good at, perhaps a little bit of everything. And so no matter how small or how big the group is at any given time, we have what we need. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. How about the senior and junior writer? Do you have a preference how many of them in each team?
Well, some of it is determined by money, how much money we have to pay them. Senior writers can be very expensive. So junior writers often get an opportunity because they're cheap. But then junior writers oftentimes, as you stated, may require more work, because if they require more rewriting, then that means more work for us. So again, depending on the show, we look to balance it out. Is how much time do we have to write the scripts? And how good do we need the scripts to come in right away? If we have time, it may be okay to have a lot of young writers. We have time, we can rewrite them. If we don't have a lot of time, then it may be better to spend the money on fewer, more experienced writers so that we can make sure that the scripts come in ready, so that we don't have to spend a lot of time rewriting.
Okay.
Sorry to any young writers out there. That's what that is.
But did you rewrite on production, on the set, or every rewrite happened before the production?
Ooh, that's a good question. For SWATs, we are unusual because we're very responsible. We tend to have our scripts ready early and have our rewrites done early, but well before, oftentimes months before we shoot, which is unusual for a major studio show. The number one rule for a showrunner, which I did not talk about, the number one rule that will eliminate so many headaches is to have good scripts ready on time. That will take care of so many different problems. And unfortunately, so many showrunners break that rule, where oftentimes rewrites will happen during prep, on set, sometimes even when they're editing. Some of the best shows ever made were made that way. But it can be a tough process when there's constant, uncertainty. So for my taste, I like to not have chaos, me personally. Not everybody feels that way, but I try to eliminate chaos. And so we try to adhere to good scripts ahead of time. And definitely, good scripts on time for sure.
So will there any room for improvisation, like the actors or the directors or everybody that work for you are, just follow the script?
It depends on the show. There was, on SWAT, we allow for a little bit of improv because we have so many, we have plot, so many plot points that we need to make sure are clear, that are played, that we need certain things to be said to make sure the story holds together. But there have been other shows that I've been on where a little more improv was allowed. Those tend to be shows that were lighter on plot, where we're more character driven, where if a character, if an actor feels like something might be funny, or good to play in the moment, or we've gone to a location to shoot and they want to interact with the environment, then it's okay sometimes to let loose, as long as you understand that you're getting what you need for the story. But even that, you want to communicate that early. Is this the type of show where we allow improv or not? And then once you've made that decision and we're all clear on it, then we just want to be consistent. Because I think the worst thing that can happen is if you've decided early that it's one way. We don't improv ever. And then you get into shooting, and by episode 7, the actors start to want to improv. Then you get rebellion and sometimes mutiny. So you just want to be very clear and decisive up top how much freedom there is. And so we're all on the same page.
Okay. Speaking of actors, maybe we can go to the scenario 5.
Yes, perfect segue. So scenario number 5 is cast whisperers. And in this scenario, one of your talented young writers, so this is a staff where you did hire young writers. They're cheap, they're talented, but one of your talented young writers has become very friendly with the actors. and after a table read, an actress comes up to you disappointed that her story arc went away. It's something that she was not supposed to know about, but she expressed that to you. So you realize there's a leak from the writer's room, and you're pretty sure that it goes back to your chatty and talented young writer. How do you handle this?
Love is so complicated. And this is interesting because the actress comes up to me disappointed with how her character arc went away. Maybe there are two things. First, maybe I have to talk to this young and talented writer that you cannot do that. There's professional line, and you sometimes, most of the time, what happened in writers' room cannot be leaked to the actors or people that do not have to know about that. But the interesting case about this scenario is, sometimes we need to hear from the actor's point of view about the characters. Yeah, maybe it's like, it's a lot for us because we can maybe we can rewrite if she disappointed and have a better suggestion for the character, maybe we can accept that. I don't know.
It's a good point. One of the things that we look to do, I learned this recently, we do it on SWAT, is just like meeting with the writers ahead of time, we meet with every one of our actors ahead of time to ask them what they like about their character, what they think can be better, and to get their input before we start to talk about story, to try to make sure that that we're keeping in mind some of their passion for the characters that they play, and some of oftentimes good ideas that they may have. It's funny with the writers talking to actors, it's a fine line because we've I agree in that you do want the writers to be able to listen to the actors and be able to have a good communication with them, to respect what they do. And then at the same time, the writers also have to understand what is allowed to be outside of the room and what must stay in the room. And so sometimes with a young writer, they may not be clear on it until they're told.
Yeah.
And it requires sometimes a communication, learning process for them. We've gone through that a few times. I was talking to a young writer earlier today a little bit about that.
But at what point that you talk with your actors? After the first season or between the table reading or?
Every season, and early in seasons 1 and 2, we used to do a table read for every episode, and we would talk to them after every table read. But sometimes I even talk to them even on the weekends. There's we had Thanksgiving last week. I texted every one of them, Happy Thanksgiving, hope as well, and I get responses back, and sometimes some will want to talk about their dog and storylines and that kind of thing. And I'm always open. I let them know anytime they have questions they can ask, and I will talk to them about it because I do deeply respect what they do. But I always try to be careful in that they have a different perspective on story than the writers. The writers have to see the entire spectrum, the entire story. And the actor oftentimes is focusing on the moment, the moment they are playing. So because of that, oftentimes I try to provide them with what they need to play the moment. But sometimes if they know too much, if they know my character's going to die in 5 episodes, it may not allow them to focus on the moment in the same way. And so that's why we try to be careful with the writers. Make sure that they have everything they need to play their role, you know, and to do their job well. But remember that there are elements down the road that may change, that, you know, we're still working on. So don't offer the cake before it's fully baked. You know, let's make sure that we have everything ready. And so when you reveal it to the actors, it is in a moment where it is cemented and has been thought about, and they can have confidence in what is going to happen. Otherwise, it can cause questions and second guessing sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, but how about the directors? You know, in Indonesia, we're not familiar with the terms of showrunner or the creator. Even when we try to tell even the OTT platform, we have a showrunner or and creator, but still they prioritize to credit the directors more. Still in Indonesia. Yeah. So how a showrunner and the writers you know, collaborate with the director who is in charge to, you know, the visual style, the depth of the characters when they act. Is it showrunner or the directors?
Well, it's a the showrunner is the overall boss, but the showrunner allows the director to have power on the set. It is the director's set. So the director decides where we put the camera, and the director speaks to the actors, and the director determines what type of lens we're going to use. And the director works with the DP, the director of photography, to determine how to light the scene. All of those are the job of the director in the US. But the showrunner determines if the director is hired or not. The showrunner will be the person who, if the director has any questions about a story or to make sure that they're directing it the way they should, they ask, you know, the showrunner. The showrunner in advance tends to have what we call a tone meeting with the director, which is a long and very detailed meeting, oftentimes 4 hours, 5 hours, where we go through the script, every single scene, and we go over what the story expectations are in every scene, you know, and that is for the director to understand so that we can be on the same page. Because sometimes a director may come in TV, and that's where it's different than movies, is that, at least in the US, we don't often have the same director directing every episode.
Yeah.
Sometimes on some series that can happen, but most of the time there are different directors with every episode. And so because the director is coming in oftentimes from having done something else, they're a visitor to your show. And sometimes directors can come in, and if they don't have a good idea of what your show is about, they may try to direct it in a different way. You know, so if you are making a show that is about zombies and it's horror, and you have a director come in and they start to try to direct it as though it's a comedy, that can be a problem. So that's why we had the tone meetings before, to make sure we're on the same page with every single scene. And it can be helpful for a director if they're coming in as a visitor, because they can then also understand from you, you know, when you speak to these actors, this actor, understand that this actor is very sensitive, so be careful when you speak to this actor. Or this actor really, really loves good, strong direction, so make sure you're very clear with this, you know, actor. Or you know, our show is very big on style and cool shots, so let's make sure that we get great atmosphere and make sure that, you know, you're shooting it very creatively with interesting lighting. These are all generalities, but these are things that we go over with the directors ahead of time. And again, that's only because really, oftentimes with multiple episodes and different directors coming in, the showrunner is the only element that is there for every episode. So that's why the showrunner, the writer, is in charge, is because they see the entire vision. And oftentimes with directors in TV, they're just coming in for the one episode and then going to do something else.
So is it important for a showrunner to have directing skills?
Not necessarily, no. There are many, many showrunners who have never directed before and have zero desire to direct, and may have very little knowledge of what it takes to direct, may not know how to talk about lenses, may not know how to talk about aspect ratios, may not know how to talk about different types of lighting scenarios. Many, many showrunners do not have that knowledge. What a showrunner simply needs is the knowledge of the storytelling process. What is your vision? How do you want this scene to feel? What do you want to convey in this episode? You need to be able to very clearly articulate that and then trust your director to direct it. There are other showrunners who do like to direct. And sometimes there can be clashes with the director if that showrunner likes to micromanage. Hopefully not. But it does not, oftentimes for a showrunner, they're in charge of the creative decisions. So that does not mean that you are the one who has to direct. You're also not the one who has to edit. You're simply the one who has to be able to effectively convey what you expect out of a director and what you expect out of an editor. And then you hire the right people and you trust them to do a great job for you.
Okay.
So I can't remember. Is there another slide after this?
Yeah, I think we have that.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so this one happens a lot too. Last few years, these people have started to get weeded out a little bit. But so this is the guy's guy, scenario number 6. So one of your male writers takes joy in telling a female writer that men don't do that. And this female writer stops pitching, stops offering ideas, and she loses confidence. How do you, as a showrunner, rectify that? And by the way, this also applies not just to gender, but also to race, to religion, to ethnicity, to sexual orientation, to class.
This is tough. And it happened a lot. Okay. What we've been trying to do, we make the characterization first. So then we have this form as what is this character, how the characters talk, think, and how he or she background, his or her background influence the action when they have the problem. So we have this form, and then when we discuss about that, we hopefully we can stay out from this the man don't do that or woman don't do that, things like that. So we prepare the characterization, the research for the characters and the arc, how the story work rules and stuff before we enter to the pitching.
Okay. So you handle that ahead of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully. But how you do that?
You only do the best you can, right? And it's difficult sometimes until you see them, people interact with each other, and then you learn. We had a writer who we did not know had certain elements of his personality that were problematic. And we worked with him for 3 years. And then we were fortunate because he left the show right before he had a very public mistake that he made. We were fortunate because it didn't happen when he was on our show, but it happened afterwards. But we didn't know that we considered him to be a nice guy when he worked with us. So sometimes it's hard to tell. You try to do your best, and then, ahead of time to try to evaluate. And even then,
Yeah. Even you prepare, so we don't have to deal with this kind of dynamics. Yeah. I think that's the risk of when you work in team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the double-edged sword. But I do think what I found is 9 times out of 10, if you do your homework, you will find good people.
Yeah.
And they will be good for you.
Yeah.
So it's rare where there's a bad choice. If you've done your homework ahead of time, I think it's rare where a person can turn out to be bad. But every once in a while, it can happen.
Okay, but do you make, as the showrunner or the creator, do you make the characterization first, or you make it on the writer's room?
Both. I make the initial character description, background, biography, but I like for the writers to be able to bring their experiences to help to flesh out the characters. So their entire background may not be determined. We try to leave it a little bit open so that we have places we can go that might be surprising. So it's sometimes it's on purpose to leave it open so that we can find out new things that maybe I didn't think about for our characters. For some writers can find it a little frustrating because they want to know everything about the character. They want you to tell them. But I tend to find that if writers can feel some ownership where they can contribute to the characters, then they do better work. Instead of just being told what to do, they feel like, they've been able to add certain details and point to those stories and that character with pride because that's part of them. A lot of times they will do better work, I think. I think I received a notice. Do we have?
We need to move to Q&A session.
Yes.
Yeah, we do need to move.
That's great. Awesome answers.
Yeah. So we already have questions from the audience. I think I'm gonna just read it. From Rati Kumala, the first question on SWAT. How long does it take to develop one episode from idea until the script's ready to shoot?
Typically, it takes us 8 to 10 days to put the script together in the room, and another 2 weeks to write the script, and then another week after that to revise the script on notes. So altogether, it's around 4 weeks from the beginning of the idea to the end to the production draft that is ready to shoot.
Okay, from the first on the first step of the development, what are the details that you need to develop in order for the writer to be ready to write the script?
Well, the writer has to understand. It's helpful for them to understand which script they're going to write, which order, which number they're going to write, and therefore where that falls in the season, the story that we're telling. If episode 6 is the episode where a main character dies, then it's helpful for the writer to know I'm going to be writing that episode so that they can come up with ideas. But then in addition to that, I find that it's helpful for the writers to have ideas that they're excited about writing even ahead of time. What are things you've always wanted to write about? What are things from, some people get inspiration from books or movies. Some people get inspiration from their own life. You know, I often keep a notebook similar to this, where I might write down ideas that even if I don't have a place to use the ideas, I'll just write them there because I always want to, you know, write a scene about a young girl and talking to her dog about her father. I don't know where that scene will go, but I know that I have it in that book, and maybe 2 years from now, maybe I'll find the right story to put that scene. So hopefully the writers who are thinking about things that they like to write about, scenes, stories, characters. And so when you are putting your stories together, that's where they can start to pull out some of these ideas and hopefully help to flesh out your world.
Okay, thank you. Second question from Agung Aritanto. In a writer's room, there will be a couple of writers. And what are the job description of each writers, and how do they being credited in the script?
It's a great question. So I describe the United States writers' rooms like a military. And so every credit and title indicates a different level of rank, going all the way up to executive producer. Executive producer is the highest. Executive producer is what the showrunner is, but not every executive producer is a showrunner. But executive producer is the highest. At the very, very bottom of the writer's totem pole, at least in the United States, is the staff writer. That is the beginner. So from staff writer, you have the different levels. There's staff writer, there is story editor, there is executive story editor, then there's co-producer, there is producer, there is supervising producer, there is consulting producer, there is co-executive producer, and then there is executive producer. And even though these all have different titles, different ranks, almost all of them are pretty much the same job. You just get paid more and you have more experience. So your job with any of those titles is to come in with good ideas, to contribute to the room, the group, and to write good scripts. And then on some shows to also produce your episode. Where it changes is when you get to the very top. When you get to the top and you are a high level writer, you might also be required to have more responsibility. You might be required to run the room when the showrunner is not there. You might be required to help hire directors. You might be required to help fire people or to help resolve conflicts. But in certain rooms, unless you are a room where you are a round table where everyone has the same weight, no matter what your title is, then in some rooms you have more weight. Your words have more weight if you have a higher title. So there have been times staff writers become frustrated sometimes because sometimes you may feel as though you're not being heard if you're the lowest. You come in and you have an idea and you offer the idea and it seems like no one hears you. But then a co-EP, executive producer, says the same idea 10 minutes later. And all of a sudden everyone thinks it's fantastic. But it's just because there's a different weight. It's just the way it is. So in some rooms. So that's pretty much how it works, but the job is pretty much the same for most of those rankings. The only difference is just the money and the experience.
Okay, thank you. I think that explains it. So the third question from Dina Wir, in developing a story like a CSI or SWOT, is there a consultation or even supervising from the police department?
A great question. There was a time years ago, meaning the 1950s and 60s, where when police shows were written, they were supervised by police departments to make sure that nothing bad was said about the police. And, that was a long time ago. Things have changed. So now what you find is we have consultants who it's our choice to use them. We hire them, just like we hire a director or an editor. We hire consultants. And we try to be very clear about what we want to get from our consultants. In our case, we use our consultants, and we have good consultants, to make sure that we have accurate research on the way things are done. So we'll try to make sure that our actors look the way they're supposed to act when they're being cops. They hold their guns the right way, because most of them don't even own guns, but they have to act like they know a lot about guns. The consultant helps with that. And different shows have different types of consultants. SWAT is a police show, so we have police consultants. But when I was on a show called Numbers, where it was FBI agents who solved crimes with math. We had mathematicians as consultants, because we had to understand about different types of theory and game theory, and most writers don't know about that. So you need a consultant to be able to tell you. When I wrote on a sports show, football show, Friday Night Lights, we had a football consultant. Most of the writers did not know about sports or care. So you have a consultant to be able to explain, this is how the sport is played. And when you write, these are the terms that you use. But they're hired just like any other specialist. And again, their role and the expectation of what their role needs to be is explained ahead of time.
So
thank you.
So can I follow up question? Sorry. So do the consultation happen before or during the writing process?
Both.
Yeah, even the production.
Yeah, both. We allow the writers to have the freedom as they're writing. If you have questions,
okay.
Because we pay our consultants, reach out to them, ask them, even as you're writing.
So they sit on in the writers' room?
No, we never allow them in the writers' room. Okay. That's only for the writers. But we will allow when the writers are, when they're writing at home or they're writing in their office, they can always call the consultant or text them at any time to get questions answered. And some of them like it, more than others. Some will do it a lot. Well, they may have 2-hour conversations with the consultant. Others only want to talk to them just a little bit. So that's where the different strengths of different writers come in. Some writers love research, and other writers hate research. But we give them the resources so that if they need it, is there.
Okay. Gina? Okay, we move on to the next question. This is an interesting question. Based on your experience, has writers' room ever fallen into rivalry among writers?
Ooh. I've nearly seen writers get into a fist fight on a few occasions. Yeah. And a few of those have been a woman wanting to fight a man. So I've seen, it depends on the room. That was a room that was built on chaos. That room, every day was chaos. And that was the tone of that room. Everything about it was chaos. So there were arguments and fights, and one writer would bring in his dog, and his dog would try to bite people, and that was a chaotic that was a chaotic room.
And was that planned that way? Because you said it was tone. Is that really the plan for from the showrunner?
If you asked the showrunner, he would probably say no. But if you look at his life, you're saying no. That's who he is.
Okay.
Everywhere he goes, the chaos must follow. It must be created. And even if it was not present, even if you were on an island somewhere and there's nothing else around but coconut trees, he must create chaos. That's the way he functions. So these are things that you start to understand when you're around people, and it influences the entire operation. So in that case, we learn after seeing over and over again, said, no, I think that's the way he functions, is that he must have, if it's not there, he must create it. But yes, there are rivalries that happen. I tend to find that sometimes you can get good work out of that, by the way. Some of the best shows and the best TV ever made was made out of chaos. But for me personally, I find that the quality of life is higher if I have less chaos. So I try to diminish chaos. I don't like it, but some people love it.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, next question. In a writer's room, is there any tips to improve each writers on the team?
Any tips for writers, you say?
Any tips? This is a very general question.
Yeah, I would simply say just make sure you're excited about what you're doing. You know, because it is a difficult job. It is a fun job, but it's a difficult job. It's only worth it really if you enjoy what you're doing. So that goes back to being honest with yourself. Make sure that whatever you're writing, if you're choosing to hire a writer or you're choosing to be hired, make sure that it's something that you like and that you're passionate about. Otherwise, it can take, I think, an exercise that should be a lot of fun, and it can turn it into something that is a chore, and that would be a tragedy.
Okay. The next question is from Nafisa. So showrunner is almost the same with producer. What's the connection between showrunner and producer?
So a showrunner is always a producer, but a producer is not always a showrunner.
Okay, how does that work?
The showrunner is the head producer, in essence. There may be multiple producers on the project, but the head producer is the showrunner.
Okay,
so
that's,
yeah.
Okay. The next question, I think this is also a short question. From Chris, in a writer's room, can it be said that the positions are showrunner, senior writers, junior writers, researcher? Is that the way a writer's room works?
In a general sense, yes, except there's one category that was left out. There's the middle class, the mid-level writers. And those are the writers who have a little bit of experience. They're not beginners, but they're also not the bosses yet. So the mid-level writers are writers that are like executive story editor, co-producer, producer. That's like mid-level. And so they don't tend to have enough authority to tell other people what to do, unless it's only them in the room with the younger writers, the staff writer, you know. But they are the writers who tend to be in a position to learn how to become a boss. They're the writers that They're the writers that used to be staff writers and are now learned enough so that they've been able to move up and are gaining skills and abilities and knowledge, but still have a lot to learn. So there's. Go ahead.
And how do you determine that position? Is that where when the showrunner hire these people and determine that you will be the staff writer, you will be the middle range writer, and you will be the senior writers?
It's determined by two things. It tends to be determined most of the time in the U.S. is most of the time determined by market, by what was the position you had on your last show, and how much are we willing to pay you on this show. If you were a staff writer on the last show, someone else is probably not going to want to pay you to be an executive producer. That's a big jump and a lot more money. But they may want to pay you to be the story editor. But then you do have some showrunners who may feel strongly about certain writers, who may feel as though, yes, this writer is young, but I really believe in them. And so I want them to be a high-level writer, even though they have very little experience. I think that they're talented, and therefore I'm choosing for them to become, producer. But it's often two elements. It's who's paying the bills and who does the showrunner want? And there's a dance and a negotiation as to what the writers, what their titles, what their credits will be based on those two things.
Great. Okay.
And by the way, the showrunner doesn't always get what they want either. Even if a showrunner wants the young writer to be paid a lot of money, if the studio says this is all the money you're getting, we're only giving you this much, then the showrunner has to, sometimes you have to make the best of what you have.
Agreed. Okay, next question would be from, wait a second. Would be from, I think that's the last question that we have. We already, okay, I can choose another one. Okay. Let's see.
There's a good question in the chat room about how showrunner solve the writer's block in the team.
Yeah, that's not in my list. Can you yeah.
Oof.
Can you elaborate, Kin?
Well, how do you solve writer's block?
Yeah.
What I can tell you, for some showrunners, the idea of writer's block is terrifying because it's not just writer's block when you're in charge. That means other writers are looking at you, they're waiting. And it's one thing to have writer's block on your own. It's another thing to have writer's block in front of other writers. What I tend to find is it helps to be honest. You don't have to always have the answer or act like you do. If I've come up with writer's block, sometimes I'll tell the writers, like, I just need to give this some thought. I don't have an answer right now. I don't have a good answer right now. I need to think about it. Now, the way that I tend to work through it, I don't get writer's block very often, but when I do, I tend to find that if I can take my mind off of the writing for a moment, it'll help. So even if that means going out for a walk, taking a nap, going to sleep for a night and waking up with new ideas, going to watch a movie, doing something that completely has nothing to do with the story, then oftentimes it can allow the brain to rest a little bit and perhaps for you to think about it a little bit differently. If you continue to have writer's block, no matter what, over and over again, then you may want to also ask, is this the story I want to tell? Am I running into a problem because there's a problem with the story? So you want to evaluate, is there a problem with the story, or is there simply a solution I haven't come up with yet? And if the problem is simply that you haven't come up with a solution, then oftentimes I find that freeing the mind in whatever way is best. For some people is going to the beach, for some is hiking, for some is driving around the city, for some is being with friends. Whatever it is, try to find a way to free up your mind. And for me, oftentimes that tends to help. I can come back at it with a fresh set of eyes.
Okay. Next question. From Henry Kurspria. Plot arc versus character arc, which should come first, and should it be consistent?
The answer to the first question is it depends on the tone of the show. I tend to find that most people, when they watch TV, in my opinion, tend to really be clued in by character. I think occasionally, if you have a show that's really, really great with mystery, you maybe tune into plot more than character in order to answer the question, to get to the heart of the mystery. But I think with TV, when you're talking about multiple episodes, not in movies, it's different. You can sometimes get away with all plot and not worry about character that much. But with multiple episodes, I tend to find that on some level, it helps if you care about the people in it. It helps for you to keep coming back. So I tend to feel like it helps to have a character arc, at least in mind. However, there are some shows, especially cop shows, where plot is the king, where the plot arc is oftentimes the most important. What we did with SWAT, because I've worked on shows where the plot was number one, is I was more interested in finding, in this case, a type of show where typically plot is number one and flipping it so that the character is number one and plot still works. And you want both. You want both to be great. But the answer to that question is it completely depends on the type of show it is. There are some shows that have very little plot. It's all character. It's people, talking to each other for the most part, and very little plot that helps to drive it. And then there are some shows that are a lot of plot. CSI is probably more plot than character. A lot of it is about the mystery. A show like The Crown has strong plot, but it's mostly character. It's mostly about what the characters are going through. So it just depends on the show. And what was the second question?
Second question was, should it be consistent? Once
you've decided what your show is about, I think it helps to be consistent. But there are some shows, anthology shows, where every episode is different. The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, every episode is different on those shows. So nothing is consistent. So you want to be, the bigger question is you want to be clear on what is my show about. Once you've landed on what my show is about, then you want to be consistent in that. If my show is an anthology series where I've decided that my show is going to be about something different every episode, then I have to be consistent in being inconsistent. Because this is a show where every episode is about something different. But you just want to be clear about what your show is about.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you. I think that would be the last question. Oh, that one is already answered. So, okay. I think we have one interesting question. The last question from Aziz Astar. Can someone start an independent writer's room to sell story script to studios? Does that happen?
Yes, it's happened. That's happened with. It's happened. It happens probably more in movies than with TV. What I tend to find is you just want to make sure that you have a clear understanding amongst the writers as to what you're doing and what the expectation is. Because what you would not want to do, I think, is to gather a bunch of writers, have them contribute to your script. you go off and you sell your script and you tell everybody you wrote it and nobody ever knows. You have some writers trying to hunt you down. So if everyone is clear, then certainly, yes, you can do that. And there are large companies who do that for movies. Like the Marvel movies do that now. Star Wars does that. Transformers does that, where they'll have writers' rooms for movies ahead of time. They'll plan out what are the next 3 Star Wars projects and bring writers together to brainstorm and then determine. But the writers understand going in, I'm here to contribute. I may get credit, I may not. I'm definitely getting paid. And they already know coming in what the expectation is. They don't get blindsided later.
Maybe I want to add it to answer the question. Wahana Creator was built from independent writers' room. Yeah, we have Wahana Penulis first before we built Wahana Creator. So if you guys want to make independent writers' room, just do that. Yeah, so we write a few series first, and then we move to a writers' room for the movie, and then we become a story company and production house, and makes our own movies. Yeah, because why we determine it to you to talk to this broad audience, Aaron, because Wahana Penulis, me and Aris first was learn from you how to make series. Yeah, that's why, and I think it's so important. Even to the new generation have this kind of knowledge first, so they can have more better, and there will be many writers' room, and there will be more diverse writers' room in Indonesia.
Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah.
You flatter me.
Yeah?
Yes, you flatter me. But I think it's a good system. It can work very well if you need it. I think it allows you a lot of flexibility. And writing is hard, but it makes it a little bit easier when you have friends that can help.
Yeah. Of course.
It is. Okay, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Gina. This has been a very wonderful session, and also thank you for the audience for the question and the participations. And I will.
They're planning to make writers' room right now.
hopefully we'll get more writers.
Use Zoom, use Discord, or we can use cerita-cerita for make new writers' room for Indonesia. I think we need more showrunner for this industry.
Yeah, we need more stories. Back to you, Mbak Rahmalia.
All right. Thank you so much, Mas Arif. And thank you, Mr. Aaron Thomas, Mbak Gina. You're all amazing, especially for sharing the knowledge and insights to the scenarios, how to start, how to tackle problem situations, as well as tips to becoming a great creator and leader with a vision for whatever role that you take in the writer's room. And we also saw a presentation from a professor who also grows and learns from experience, Mr. Aaron Thomas. Thank you very much. I hope there will be another opportunity for us to meet again. Maybe you will come to Indonesia one day. And and so we can learn more from you. So let's give a round of applause to all speakers, our moderator today. Thank you so much. Ya, dan juga terima kasih untuk rekan-rekan semua yang sudah hadir secara online. Senang sekali melihat antusiasmenya. Terima kasih ya untuk pertanyaan-pertanyaannya. Semoga mendapatkan insight yang berguna untuk berkreasi di industri kreatif ya. Oh ya, sekali lagi saya mau ingetin jangan lupa post story momen kalian selama mengikuti acara cerita-cerita dan tag @wahana.edukasi, @wahana.creator, dengan hashtag hadiah ya untuk pemenang yang beruntung, dan pengumumannya besok di akhir sesi ketiga jam 5 sore. Alright, now before we end the session, it wouldn't be complete without a photo taking. So I'm inviting all speakers and moderator to give your best pose. I know, Mr. Thomas, that it's super late over there, still Friday night, but we want to see your bright smile. Okay, so I'm gonna count and say cheese in the count to 3 and pause for 5 seconds, okay? All right. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Okay. Shall we have another pause? No, I think 1 is enough. I saw the cat behind Bagina. I think she just made a lot of poses already. So, once again, thank you very much. Jangan lewatkan sesi 2 cerita hari Minggu besok jam 1 siang dengan narasumber yang tentu tidak kalah hebatnya. Dan mewakili Wahana Edukasi, saya Rahma Alia berterima kasih untuk keikutsertaan rekan-rekan sekalian. Stay creative. Sampai jumpa besok. Have a great weekend to you all. Bye.